Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. I'm having a very busy month, and so I'm not able to put as much time into a video as I normally might. The reason for this is that I'm finally going to begin working as a registered provisional psychologist. It's terrifying, but also very exciting to be finally putting all of my hard work into practice. On that note, however, I thought I might take a moment to get a little philosophical about the field of psychology. You know from my Hijacking of Higher Education series, among others of my videos, that there is a whole lot of junk ideology that pollutes the whole field these days. I've challenged at length a lot of specific things in the readings and why I take issue with them. However, I had a more general train of thought running through my mind the last few days as I prepare to move back into a counseling role after a brief hiatus due to more motherly aspects of my life. This thought process essentially encompasses my overarching philosophy about counseling, about why I wanted to become a counselor in the first place, what that role has always meant to me, and as a result, why I am so passionately against all of the ideological agenda pushing that has come to characterize a large portion of the field. Let me start by describing what happens when I'm with a client. When I get in that space with someone, it's almost like I become a different person. In large part, my opinions seem to kind of naturally fade away. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to claim that I become a blank slate with no viewpoints or biases or anything like that. I'm just saying that who I am, things like political views, various identity pieces, things of that nature, they get put on the shelf. There's a very good reason that this happens. It allows me to focus on helping my client within their framework. Naturally, I bring my expertise as a counselor, along with my chosen theoretical frameworks and interventions of choice, and I use all of that to guide the sessions as you would expect. But in a way, all of that is secondary to being able to help a client within their framework, their way of being, their way of conceptualizing the world and how things happen. Let me see if I can put that another way. As a newly minted counselor, I gained the skills and techniques to be able to work with a client and to be able to develop a good sense for how to recognize problems and make suggestions on how to target various issues. And of course, I have my own personal opinions on how things ought to be or how to make things better. But despite all of that, I am not really going to be able to create meaningful change for a client by just handing them a list of all my beliefs, my personal ways of solving problems, or even just a standardized list of interventions and saying, "Here you go, best of luck." Sure, there might be some people out there who feel completely lost and unable to function, and they might initially view such an approach positively. You know, sort of a, "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, please tell me what to do" kind of attitude. But an external focus like that is not in any way the road to success for most clients. And even for those folks I mentioned, such a technique would be offering more of a bandage than a solid base from which to develop appropriate social skills. It's not even just looking at things from an external lens. People can think they are offering advice that targets the individual that really doesn't at all. Take, for example, common pithy advice like, "Just be yourself," or "Just be confident." People throw it out there all the time, but I really don't think it actually successfully lands with most people. Even if those who tout this advice have some specifics on how to be more like yourself or how to be more confident, it's usually just a meaningless outsider prescription on another person's life. Never mind the fact that some people are kinda jerks and would actually do better by being less like themselves, and some people who have never had a successful relationship with another human might really have no groundwork laid to have any sort of confidence with people. Working with people from a prescriptive point of view like this rarely gets to the root of the problem because it doesn't get into the insider perspective of the client to find out how they experience the world and where their perceptions of things might be causing them problems. That being said, I want to emphasize their perceptions here and return to the topic of engaging with the client within their personal framework. When I get into a space with a client, a strange sort of magic happens where I can take their perspective and see things in an entirely different way. It's not anything naive like a blindly positive view of everything they're doing, but it's a kind of method of getting into the headspace of seeing things through the lens of another and figuring out how they are experiencing their problem in their own life. It's why you'll never see me taking the exact same approach with everyone all the time, or writing out a list of prescribed activities to do, saying, "This will definitely positively impact your life." It's one of the reasons why I was never particularly interested in psychiatry, where I simply see many people going and saying, "My life sucks. Prescribe me a pill to make it not suck." The one-size-fits-all approach never really flew with me. But anyway, I want to be clear here. This transformation I'm talking about happens no matter what the client believes. A client could have a completely different worldview from me, even one that I frankly find reprehensible in my own personal life, and it wouldn't matter. This is because the focus in counseling is, or at least it should be, discovering what the client needs in order to work through or reconceptualize their difficulties in a way that is meaningful to them. It doesn't matter what I think or how I feel about their beliefs, perceptions, politics, whatever. Not one bit. Totally irrelevant. So if I encounter a client who is, say, struggling with anxiety because a social justice mindset is making them feel like they are privileged and not doing enough about it, I would never win them over by telling them their mindset is based on a load of hooey. Instead, I'll probably make more headway by focusing positively on their sense of wanting to improve the world for others, and maybe try to hone in on ways in which they are, in fact, doing plenty enough. And believe it or not, when you come at clients from the good old Rogerian view of unconditional positive regard, you'd be surprised at the ways you can come to see the best in people, even when they're embroiled in a mindset you normally bristle at. I think the best, most successful therapists are those who work with their clients, not at their clients. Helping clients to improve their lives in a way that makes sense for them is key to finding pathways of change that are sustainable, empowering, and reasonably unbiased by the counselor's personal beliefs on how to live a good life. I say reasonably here because, of course, you are never going to escape this bias fully. But to me, knowing and recognizing how your bias might come out in the room is a major factor for improving legitimate connection with clients. Now, with all of this background context, I can start to make the point of why I take such an issue with ideological agenda pushing in psychology. No, not just take issue with, but see it as absolutely antithetical to effective psychology practice. For a relatively recent example, let's just go ahead and turn to my old nemesis, the APA guidelines on men and boys, and pick out a few choice highlights. Guideline 3. Psychologists understand the impact of power, privilege, and sexism on the development of boys and men and on their relationships with others. Application. When working with boys and men, psychologists can address issues of privilege and power related to sexism in a developmentally appropriate way to help them obtain the knowledge, attitudes, and skills to be effective allies and potentially live less restrictive lives. Male privilege tends to be invisible to men, yet they can become aware of it through a variety of means such as education and personal experience. Guideline 7. Psychologists strive to reduce the high rates of problems boys and men face and act out in their lives such as aggression, violence, substance abuse, and suicide. Psychologists strive to understand the multiple cultural and individual difference factors that lead to aggression and violence in men and boys, including the intersection of exposure to adverse childhood experiences and traditional masculine socialization, where applicable, by having empathy for the causes, e.g., lack of personal and social resources to cope with trauma, of aggressive and violent behavior. Psychologists strive to prevent violence by adopting trauma-sensitive and gender-sensitive approaches with young boys in schools, and by using psychological methods that increase empathy for others, model control of aggressive behavior, and increase communication skills or problem solving. Jesus, Kentucky Fried Christ, I'm getting angry at this document all over again. I'd like to ask you now, dear viewers, if you step into a room with a man with these kinds of belief structures in your head, already coloring your view of what his situation looks like, how can you ever expect to be able to get into a mindset where you are truly taking his perspective on things? With all of these ridiculous assumptions, how can you ever claim that you're going to be able to support that client with any kind of neutrality? To say nothing of the baked-in problems with therapist-client alliance you're establishing from the very beginning. I'm not even talking just about the vulnerable client being highly offended that you're choosing to focus on the ways in which they are privileged or socialized to be violent or lack empathy. I'm talking also about fostering bias within yourself as a counselor and coming to see men in this inherent and automatically problematic way. If you are reading over and over again about how men are privileged or socialized into all manner of negative behaviors, how is this not going to cause you to feel more hardened to them over time, if not immediately? I'm not saying, for example, that there are men out there who haven't grown up in an environment that fostered violent behaviors in them. But if you step into that room assuming that that is the thing you need to focus your interventions on, when that client feels that his aggressive behavior has kept him safe, and instead it's his loneliness and isolation that he'd rather talk about, you are never going to get anywhere with him. He is likely to feel at best unheard and misunderstood, and at worst, pissed off for wasting his time and then feeling like therapy will never do anything for him because you're such a poor excuse for a therapist. Okay, let me calm myself down a little bit by backing up and speaking more broadly again. Inserting ideology and agenda into the counseling relationship is the opposite of what therapists should be trying to do, because instead of focusing on what the client needs to heal and feel better about themselves, you're focusing on your own perspectives and how the client will feel better if only they learn from your supposedly wizened ways. I'm not saying clients don't learn anything from therapy, of course, but hopefully what I'm saying makes sense. It's less a focus on them and more a focus on you. The focus in therapy should not be on you. I'm not only criticizing social justice ideology here either, though that does tend to be the most common brand with this kind of thing. There's a power differential with a therapist and a client, and I would feel the same way if the therapist tried to use their position to influence their client to, say, patronize a family business or engage in inappropriate relations with them. Here's another way to put it. When you go into therapy with an agenda in mind, the goal of therapy can then become corrupted to be around focusing on achieving that agenda rather than achieving the client's goals. When you want to successfully educate a client about their privilege and help them to become more humble, you might find that you clash with the client's stated goal of developing a sense of self-confidence and personal appreciation. You may be more likely to make choices that are less effective than you otherwise would because your focus is co-opted by something other than what the client needs to get better. One of the sections of the Canadian Psychological Association's Code of Ethics talks about a lack of bias and the importance of evaluating how one's own experiences and beliefs might influence them in the counseling room. So when I see agenda pushing in counseling, I am baffled as to how this is not automatically seen as contradictory to the very foundational ethics we are meant to follow. As a person, I am aware that I have my own views of things, my own beliefs, my own politics. I feel that I am pretty passionate and even vocal about these things. But as a counselor, those things take a back seat to the needs of the client. More than that, they get out of the damn car and wait at home. Because if, as a counselor, my absolute first priority is not helping the client as best and as thoroughly as I can in the ways that they need to feel better, then I am not doing my goddamned job. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.